Are you having trouble with forgiveness and need to learn how to forgive? We'll help you out today. I'm Jonathan Yellen, and this is Finding the Point. Hey, welcome to the show today. I'm Jonathan Yellen, board-certified behavior analyst. With us today is ordained pastor of God, Aaron Mudge. How are you doing, Pastor Aaron?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, me too.
Enjoying the weather lately. It's been kind of nice.
We've had terrible storms and lost power,
Oh,
so I'm a
really?
little jealous. But don't worry, I forgive you, which is the topic of the video today. Forgiveness can be a tough thing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's certainly something that's challenging, and
Yeah, it is.
thankfully, God's Word provides a lot of answers to that, and gives us some hope and direction on how we can deal with forgiveness and have the ability to forgive when we've been done wrong and the reasons why we should forgive. Maybe we should start with that. Pastor Aaron,
Yep.
You're a pastor with a lot of experience. What would you say? Why should someone bother trying to forgive?
Well, I think there's really several reasons. One is I read a quote somewhere. I don't remember who said it, but harboring bitterness against someone is like taking poison and trying to kill the other person. Ultimately, when we harbor bitterness and we don't forgive someone, it hurts us. Another reason is that we should be, if we're going to show love to other people, we need to forgive them. But I think ultimately the biggest reason is because God has forgiven us, and God has commanded us to forgive others as He has forgiven us. And I think that forgiveness is an incredibly powerful picture of God's love, of God's forgiveness, and of the gospel, really.
It really is.
Ephesians 4:32 says, "And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you." And we've talked to... Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, Jesus really gave us that perfect example of forgiveness. I mean, like, his whole arrival on earth and sacrifice on the cross is that ultimate act of self-sacrifice and forgiveness for us. I think that's that model there, and the forgiveness that we have should motivate us, I think, to understand the need we have to forgive others.
Yeah, and this forgiveness, as God commands us to, is contrary to our nature, towards the sinful fleshly nature. The world does not seek to forgive as we ought to. I mean, the philosophy of most people is, you hurt me, I hurt you back.
Yeah, that's true. And when we're talking about the world's philosophy, I mean, how many times you see on Facebook those posts that are like, get rid of everyone in your life that doesn't make you happy. It's like, okay, first off, you're going to be really lonely. Don't do that. Because pretty much everyone's going to do something to hurt you at some point.
Yeah.
But like, that's the world's philosophy, though. If it doesn't make you happy, if it doesn't, as we would say in behavior analysis, if it's not someone's not being reinforcing, then get rid of them. That's just not a smart way to live, because ultimately you are going to suffer because other people are around you. It's just, but also you'd suffer if you were alone. So at the end of the day, we do have to interact with other people, and interact with other people when they hurt us. The alternative is some sort of savage dictatorship relationship with other people where you just kill and maim and steal and subjugate all others around you. Or you live a life subjugated underneath that if you're not the most powerful one. It's a miserable existence. That's what a world without forgiveness and love is like. And I think we want to avoid that as a society and as individuals as well.
Forgiveness is a selfless act if it's done correctly. For me to say, well, you hurt me, I hurt you back, that's a very self-centered view. And the idea of cutting people out that hurt me, that's focusing on what's best for me. But God's word tells us, the contrary to popular human belief, we should be focusing on others, and we should be not be focused on me.
And
And
if I can jump in and add there, Pastor Aaron, it is actually better, even for us to forgive.
yep,
It's
it
better
is.
for us in the long and short term, in my opinion,
Yep.
and the Bible's opinion as well. It is better to forgive now than it is to harbor that lack of grace and let that root of bitterness build up. You know, the Hebrews 12, 14, and 15 passage, follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord, looking diligently lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. When we don't get rid of that bitterness, or that root of bitterness and forgive, it's damaging to ourselves.
Yeah.
It's not just like a lot of times our choices are, do I do what's best for myself in the short term, or do I do what's better in the long term? And when it comes to forgiveness, choosing to forgive is better for both, long and short term.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, you know, the bitterness, ultimately, when I'm bitter at someone else, I'm not really hurting them. Ultimately, I'm hurting me.
Yeah, so
And
I think
no, maybe I'm not. Let me correct that. I am maybe hurting them, but I am also hurting me, maybe even more so. And it, you know, in the verse that you read or quoted to us, at the end it says, "And thereby many be defiled." And it's interesting, if I allow a root of bitterness to take hold in my life and my heart, it affects everyone around me. It affects others, and it's very easy for that bitterness to spread.
Right. And you know, we can stop it. And so the thing to look at is to assess what are the ways that we can stop it. So it's about halfway through the episode, so we can transition to that. Pastor Aaron, let's look at how do we actually forgive. Okay. I guess we probably won't get it on screen, but we've shown these choice charts before where we've got you, and then we know fundamentally human beings perceive an antecedent or something that comes up in our life signaling that we need to make a choice. And in our case, for forgiveness, someone's done us wrong. Someone's done something wrong to us. So we have to respond to that. We have the choice to make. Are we going to choose to act? And there's basically three choices, right? We've talked about this before. We've done the charts. Go check out our old episodes if you haven't seen this. But we can choose to follow the flesh, to follow the world's way, or to follow God's way. Okay, so if we're going to follow the flesh, generally speaking, in our modern culture, if someone's offended you and done something wrong against you, your reaction to that naturally is going to probably be a fear response, assuming you're not powerful enough to attack and destroy them, which usually you aren't. You're going to have a fear response, or in behavior analysis, we'd call it escape avoidance. Okay, so you're going to either, when that person comes into your environment, you're going to do your best to avoid that person, and if they're already there, you're going to try to escape so that you don't need to deal with that person and the potential problems that you have from them because they have hurt you. This is essentially your flesh talking, right? And this is when this is the classic thing, the catty high school girls who are like, "Oh, she said that about me, I'm not talking to her again." So
well, you did that pretty well.
Yeah. Hey, I was a teacher for a long time, Aaron. I've seen it.
You've seen it all.
Seen it all. Yeah, and so we end up, and this one's tricky because we can end up following after the flesh and doing that fear, escape, avoidance response, and then calling it spiritual because you're saying, "Oh, I'm just letting them be, and I'm just gonna not confront and cause problems." It's like, this isn't really forgiveness though, because that's your root of bitterness is still growing.
Right.
The root of bitterness doesn't go away when you just try to avoid the person. So it's not a good solution. This is more of your flesh solution. It feels best to the flesh to avoid the pain and the suffering that comes from your experiences with that person or potential future problems that you'll have with that person. So the first one, Pastor Aaron, is fear. Anything you want to add on that before I go to number 2?
No, I think you really covered it pretty well. And ultimately, I mean, this topic of forgiveness is, and you mentioned it's not the right way to deal with it, to avoid, and the Bible talks about that, but we'll have to get into that at another time.
Sure. Yeah, well, that's like a whole episode, right? All right, number 2, we can choose to act based on experiences that we have learned from let's just call it learn from the world. All right, this is to act based on the world's philosophy of how we should go. This would be we kind of memed it a little bit, but like the get rid of people who don't love you, or to act in. So I've categorized this one as vengeance. So to take vengeance on them.
Okay.
All right. You're not reacting in the moment to them being there, but you're planning something and you're plotting it out, and you're planning to take, and maybe actively do take, some sort of vengeance response to them. This could also be in the moment as well, if you're going to snap at them and yell at them and, get in your little argument, cat fights. I'm still thinking teenage girls for some reason, just because they're so, sorry, girls. I know guys are just as unforgiving as girls, so sorry. But yeah, you can choose to react in that sort of vengeance mode, where you're acting based on what the world says, and this value of self, and how dare they do this to me. It's not right, it's not fair, it's all in them, and I'm going to respond and attack them for it, or plan an attack that will come out for them. This is like rumors and gossip and that sort of thing. In a marriage relationship, Pastor Aaron, if we can get past the teenagers to adults, this might be my wife does something I don't like. My wife's basically perfect, and I like all the things she does. But if she were to do something, and then I bring that thing back up again to her, I'm remembering that past experience and bringing it up,
right,
and using that to fight back with and drive this wedge. So, acting based on fear, really bad. Acting based on vengeance, also really bad. There's really only one right way, and that's to choose to act based on mercy. All right, Pastor Aaron, you're ordained. What's a great Bible definition for mercy?
Mercy, well, there's a lot of different definitions, but ultimately, is when you're speaking of God's mercy towards us, I always like to think of it as God is not punishing or not giving what we deserve, and we think of that in terms of our sin. Each of us has, because of sin, deserves death and punishment for that, but God has sent his Son in mercy and love to bring forgiveness.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting too, Hebrews 8:12 talks about God being merciful, and it brings up this idea that you mentioned a little bit earlier of not remembering what someone has done. And part of the issue, especially you get into, say, a marriage relationship, is, well, my spouse has hurt me or done something to me. And the problem is, if it's not truly forgiven, well, it comes up again. But we have this, we say, well, I need to forgive and forget. But how do you forget when somebody's hurt you? Especially when we're not talking about a little thing. We're talking about, like, maybe, say, an unfaithful spouse. How do you forget that? You don't really forget that. You're not going to forget that.
You won't.
And I think the key, the thing is, forgive and forget is not actually something, like, not worded in that way. We're not commanded in the Bible to forgive and forget. We are, however, given the example of God. Hebrews 8:12 says, "For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more." I think there's a big difference, wouldn't you, John? And as a behavioral expert, there's a big difference between forgive and forget and forgive and choose not to remember.
Yeah, I think you could say that. you're choosing to respond without taking that into account in your behavioral economics. Behavioral economics are essentially the way, to put it into a spiritual perspective, your soul is weighing the different options to decide what would be the best thing to do. Ideally, you're going to choose God and God's way in those behavioral economics, but unfortunately, we're sinful and we don't always do that. The idea here from this Hebrews 8:12 verse is that if we're going to do it, we are removing that factor from the behavioral economics that we're engaging in. And so we're going to choose to respond to that spouse, knowing what they've done and being careful about the potential for setting that up in the future, setting them up for that sin to occur in the future, but we're not going to hold that against them.
Yeah. And we're making the conscious choice. To me,
yeah.
say I forget what you've done, that's kind of a passive thing that I don't have any control over.
Yeah, I think a way to think about it, Pastor Aaron, would be to say, I actually know all the wrong that you've done. It was really, really bad. It was absolutely terrible. And also, I'm going to choose to continue as if you didn't do it. I'm going to choose to love you anyways.
And this passage in Hebrews 8:12, where it says, I will remember no more, literally means I will by no means remember anymore. And now in English, that we got the double negative thing going on, but that's not how it works in the original
that's one of those
language.
Hebrew poetry things, right?
Yeah,
or it's probably
Greek,
not Hebrew.
it would be in this case, but
but they like to
similar.
Repeat a line to emphasize, as opposed to like in English, it's a double negative. Yeah, I remember Bible class.
But it's, and I guess we're talking about, well, how do I forgive? I think it's important to remember what we've discussed is that our emotions get involved when we get hurt. And our emotions are a reflex. They're not something that we have direct control over. Is that correct,
Always.
Mr. Behavior Analyst?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So what we do control are the things that come into our environment that would trigger that reflex, and the values that we hold that trigger that reflex. So what often can happen when someone hurts you is your value of that person drops dramatically. And so it becomes very challenging to have positive feelings about them, and you're mostly going to have your negative feelings reflexes. The negative feeling reflex is triggered. But when you readjust your values by choosing to do so, and you choose to value that person, then you can adjust the emotions, or the emotions will automatically adjust to compensate. To get real practical, Pastor Aaron, because time is ticking. If you're going to have forgiveness, what you have to do is choose to take actions that reflect the change towards forgiveness to them.
Sure.
So you're going to have to take the action that you would do if that person had not done the thing. Somebody asked me about forgiveness recently. So what if my friend hired me for a job but then didn't pay me? Even after, should I just go and do that job for them again? And I would say the answer to that practically is either do the job again for free out of love for your friend because he needs the help, or recognize that if you go and do that job again, you're putting him in a position where he would be tempted to sin by not paying you what he said he would pay you. Both of those are acts of love. And if you do those choices for those reasons, then you can act based on forgiveness. You're acting as if he never sinned, but you're not forgetting. Right. It's not that you don't know. You know that if you go again to that friend, you're putting him in a spot where he's going to be tempted to sin.
And there's a difference between forgiveness and trust.
True.
There's a point where I can say, look, I forgive you, but be careful about trusting, and there's a balance there. One of the things I wanted to get to in this was, you said practically, so practically your spouse or whatever, whoever it is, somebody hurts you or upsets you. often it is a very emotional, you get very angry, and choosing to forgive that person right then when you're angry is not always the easiest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And as a pastor, I would counsel people, especially considering in the context of marriage, you do or say something, you get angry at each other, rather than continuing and yelling and screaming at each other. Take a moment, remove yourself from the situation if you have to, calm down, let yourself calm down, let the emotions calm, and then it's much easier to logically make the choice to say, I am going to forgive you, and I am going to choose to remember no more.
Yes, I can double vouch for the idea of letting yourself calm down. We call it in behavior analysis, you're establishing operations for that reinforcer you're trying to access are far too high for you to engage in rule governed behavior, which basically means you can't think straight when you're so ticked off. Okay, you can't. So don't. I think you're right. You got to remove yourself, but don't like disengage from the argument and never come back and resolve it either.
No.
So you just say, okay, wait, we're too elevated. Let's back off until we can cool a little bit. Because over time, your need is going to reduce back to a more normal level. Your need to access whatever you're fighting over. Usually it's like love or respect or something like that, right? And then once your levels calm down a little bit, you can come back and use your thinking and act based on words and acting, which is your thinking and your reason. And when we can act based on thinking and reason instead of on the peak of our emotional responses, that's going to give us a better result too, and an easier time forgiving. So, Pastor Aaron, as we are running out of time, and I've got to conclude here, the idea is to act on mercy. We know the past evil, and in spite of that, we choose to place that other person's needs first, acting in love.
Yeah.
And with that, we recognize that if you're having trouble forgiving someone, it may be related to your emotions and your emotional need for something that you have related to that person. The trick I would give is to assess your values. What's the most valuable thing? And then frame your understanding around this idea of we are forgiven because God forgave us. And if God can forgive us, we can forgive others as well. Reassess your values, reassess your emotions. Find out what that value is that you have that's making your emotions so high towards that person, and consider what value change you would need to have. That's my tips for forgiveness. Pastor Aaron, before we go, do you have any of your tips and a final challenge?
Yeah, a challenge to us, I guess, in this, I would say, ask yourself this. Am I choosing to remember no more, or am I choosing to hold on to the hurt? Remember that it's my choice, and it's something that I do have control over. And I think that maybe I would challenge those that are listening and watching to examine your life. Is there bitterness? Is there anger that you've held on to? But also, we know that in the future, if you deal with people, there's going to be problems that arise in the future. So make the choice now to say in the future, I am going to choose to forgive. I'm going to choose to remember no more.
Thank you, Pastor, and I think that's brilliant and a great way to close here. Thanks to all of you for joining us on the show today. Please go ahead and do that like, share, subscribe, comment, or follow. Someone told me the other day, Pastor Aaron, that I should say follow now because that's on Facebook. I was like, we're on YouTube too. But anyways, either way, thank you for joining us today. And let's see, any other thing? Oh, thank you to Pastor Aaron's church for sponsoring the show. Guys, it's great to have you as our audience as well. Get out there and choose rightly.